Welcome to another episode of What's Trading, getting a stalled economy moving again. Following the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant lockdowns, the question everyone wants to know is, are we trading in the right direction? What greater sign of an economy that's breathing and alive than big infrastructure build programs, particularly the construction industry? And that's what we are speaking about today. Thank you so much for joining us, Njombo Lekula from PPC.
Yeah.
As I said in my introduction, construction is just one of those signs that something is happening. It's really what gives you the energy of an economy.
Bongani, you're very correct. Construction is one of the biggest indicators, and actually it follows in terms of the trend to the GDP. So whatever happens to GDP is actually informed by construction. There is a very, very strong correlation between the two.
So how healthy is our sector, or is it a patient in need of some attention?
It is a patient in ICU that needs a very, very special attention. And if you look at it in terms of the economy itself, the sad part is that we do need infrastructure built. Not because it's a need, it's a want, it is a need. From the repair of existing infrastructure, which is deteriorating. We've heard of water issues that we've got in the country. There is the electricity issue. All of those are part of the infrastructure. I can't mention roads. It's also part of the infrastructure that we need.
Is it simplistic to think that we just need a decision? Because we are seeing decay and decline all around us. And one way to get an economy going is to spend to build our way out of trouble. Is that a simplistic view?
No, it's not actually. That's correct. We just need to make decisions about what do we need in terms of the infrastructure. So if you look at infrastructure itself or construction in itself, it is based on a few things. There is infrastructure, which is a government responsibility to provide. But that infrastructure which is provided by the government has the ability to unlock other activities with regards to construction, being housing, being provision of commercial infrastructure, being all the institutional infrastructure that is required, like your schools, your hospitals, and all of that. So basically what we would like to have is a situation where the government has got a very good, clear decision on what is required.
Give me the state of the construction market in South Africa at the moment. You say it's a patient in need of attention.
Yeah. If you look at the contribution of construction in South Africa, there's a talk about it being about 4%, 3.5% to 4% of the GDP. Currently, with the shrinking GDP, it's not in those levels of 3 to 4%. I've always disputed that number. I think it's much higher. If you consider that construction employs about 1.3 to 1.5 million people, when you do not have activity in construction, it means you are affecting all of those mouths. In South Africa, we use a factor of 4 to 5 multiplied by the employed person. So that's how much people are being affected by the construction industry. And my belief is that whatever that is infrastructure that should be provided by the government should be unlocking a whole lot more of activities within the construction sector. And then also, we look at the skills that are available for construction. They are slowly being eroded because it's not an attractive industry. If there's no activity in there, then it doesn't become as attractive.
You talk about a lack of activity. When did this begin? It wasn't that long ago. South Africa was abuzz with projects in the build-up, for example, to the 2010 World Cup. Every city, you get a stadium, you get a stadium, everybody gets a stadium. We were building schools, we're building roads, we're building hotels. When did the buzzed high.
Yeah, you're very correct. Towards the 2010, we were the busiest in South Africa in terms of providing infrastructure. And come 2010, when we've presented the World Cup, then everything started slowing down. And I think mostly it starts from local government. There is a lot of skills that are required to run a local government as a commercial entity. And that's how you deliver in terms of the requirements. Now, when you start finding that there is nothing going on in terms of, for instance, I'll give you an example. In South Africa, in most regions, when you submit your plans to either construct a commercial entity or a house, it will take you at least 3 to 6 months before you get an approval on your plans. But that is 3 to 6 months of the project not taking off from its ground.
Because you've already got the investment in terms of the business case for why you need to do this. You've got the will to do it. You've got the skills, you do it. You can't afford that kind of loss of time.
Exactly. Now, when that happens repeatedly, people that have got money to invest, they don't see us as being attractive in terms of that. So therefore, they start looking for other alternative places to can invest their money.
You talk about local government and you pick up any newspaper on any day. What are we hearing? Infrastructure is what we need, whether it's wastewater treatment plants, whether it's roads, potholes, bridges that are collapsing, hospitals that are inadequate, schools. Why is the case not so clear to so many municipalities?
Look, I'm not a politician, but I know one thing is that running a government or running a local municipality in specific, it is a business. And when you are running a business, you need skills to be able to run that business. And unfortunately, our cadre deployment strategy has ended up with people in government, in local government, that don't have any skills in terms of making sure that they deliver on their mandate. Secondly, we know about the epidemic of corruption, and that in itself has created a whole lot more problems in terms of the delivery of the infrastructure. We've got another cancer that is having a big problem or impact on construction, which is these construction mafias that we have in South Africa. And that is lack of clarity on the policies of the government. There was this whole talk about the 30% in terms of a construction project. But in essence, that 30% refers to government projects, and there is nothing wrong about it, because if you come into a Soweto and you're putting up a project, then that project, if we say construction provide jobs, it should be providing jobs, and it should be providing an economic activity in the area in which it is implemented, which means you can source labor from the local and you can source some of the activities from the local up to the level of 30% to enable the true flow of the economic part of that. But unfortunately, this has ended up into this element of construction mafias.
Does it frustrate you that that is something that hasn't been dealt with enough urgency? Because if that's the policy that's being used as a gateway for these mafia organizations to operate, then surely what you do at the stroke of a pen, you say, well, hang on. That works up to a point. If you walk into a community that doesn't have the skills base to get you to that 30%, you cannot, as a blanket rule, even if the construction mafia wasn't a factor, apply such a standard.
Exactly. It is very frustrating, not only to ourselves as a manufacturer and part of the supply chain in terms of construction, but it is also frustrating to those that have got their money, because we've seen projects that start and never finish because of all the challenges that they've got. So that has had an impact in terms of delivery of infrastructure. And we do engage the government. The wheels of the government are turning very slow. We are continuously engaging with the government to try and see how can private sector be able to assist in delivery of these projects. And there are some very good and productive combination of triple Ps that has happened with the private sector, the public sector, and the government in terms of delivering projects. I mean, for us as South Africa, if you look at Sanral is one perfect example of where a PPP can actually deliver in terms of the infrastructure that is required, but also done in a very professional way.
We just don't know how to pay for it.
Yeah, in most cases, if you look at it, I mean, there are very much living examples. If you look at the N3, you look at the N4, it's been a very beautiful project, and it still continues to deliver. And we should be looking at many of all of these other elements.
If we're being fair to government, there was a much hyped up infrastructure build program. The president had a point man on it. He's spoken about it at various sonars. Has that delivered anything?
It has, but most of it is still on a plenary stage. If you look at the activity on the N3 at the moment, it is there, and there's a lot of activity in terms of rehabilitation of the N3. There's a very big bypass that is being put in towards Durban, but it's very localized into that space. The question is, what are the other elements that we need to be putting in place? And just to demonstrate to you, I look at it in this way. If you were to go into a place like Italy and start a toy shop, you'll probably be very broke very quickly because there is no demand for toys. I mean, it's an aging population. Coming to South Africa, in terms of construction itself, there is a lot of wants, and it dictates in the fact that we need housing, we need roads, we need water reticulation, we need sewage reticulation, and all of those are standing in front of a lot of projects that could be executed in the country. So the demand is there, there's no issue. In terms of supply, in terms of skills, we still have some skills, even though that's an area that we will have to look at very, very closely. Because I believe if we were to unleash projects into South Africa, at some point we will have to import the skills because we are losing them at a very, very high rate.
But even if we had the right policy environment to make decisions, to turn around plans into actionable projects, we're now dealing with a multitude of other factors. We're looking at rising interest rates, high inflation, rising energy costs. And that's, of course, when we can guarantee power at all. Water is becoming a problem.
Yeah.
Fresh, hot on the heels of the pandemic.
Yes, and if you look at our sector itself, it was actually propped up by private sector, your ordinary household. Post the pandemic, our expectation was that things are going to move up very slowly. But actually, we saw ourselves quite busy because people like Bongani realized if I need to be working from home, I need a proper study. And there was a lot of attention in terms of residential improvements. And unfortunately, since from post-2010 World Cup, what we have seen is the shifting from the industrial sector in terms of infrastructure provision straight into residential. And that has been the strong part of the construction sector up to thus far. And you are very correct. As soon as you start finding people losing jobs, then they start prioritizing. And it's unfortunate that in the country, the first thing that you think of is the plate on the table before you can look at all those other things.
Break Break down the construction industry for me in terms of the various sector. I mean, we don't necessarily mean one thing when we talk about construction.
Yeah, we don't always mean one thing. There is the industrial side of the infrastructure, and that talks to everything related to what provides into the country. You're talking rails, you're talking roads. There's a whole lot more into that space. Then there is the commercial side, which focuses mostly on buildings, the malls that we build. This is the commercial side of the construction side. And then there is the government institutional infrastructure that needs to be provided, like your hospitals, like your schools, which we are in dire need of, which is part of what construction is all about. Then we've got the residential side, and the residential is in two parts. There is this housing infrastructure that is required, which is social in its nature, in terms of the mostly affordable housing, and there is private housing that needs to take place. So it's quite a huge area of the industry. And what we have been lacking for the last couple of years is the civil part of infrastructure provision. We're talking bridges, we're talking very big, large infrastructure that are there to unlock the rest of the economy.
Let's talk about that. I mean, given our energy crisis, for example, are there opportunities when it comes to the energy and utilities construction side?
Again, that is localized. So when we talk about this whole hype around the energy and renewables, if you look at the solar, for instance, there is very little in terms of civil structures that are provided for that. And the unfortunate part, which we need to be looking at as a country from driving economy based on this, is how much of that is imported goods and how much is actually encouraging local manufacture. You will find that there is a very large portion of what we import to provide for that. So even though we talk about it as infrastructure spend, it's actually not doing what the typical construction will do, which is providing jobs and putting food in people's tables.
How frustrating is it when you pick up a newspaper, you listen to a radio program, and you hear of an unfinished stadium, an unfinished clinic, an unfinished school, and the contractors walked away with a significant portion of the money, and we're back to the drawing board, seemingly with little consequences?
That's highly frustrating, and it's unfortunate because it's robbing South Africans of many, many other opportunities. If you look at how much money has been wasted in that, and we cannot as private sector look at that and say it's got nothing to do with us. I think we need to stand up and start making a statement. And that's why we are working quite hard with a whole lot of other organizations, including ourselves, the Cement and Concrete South Africa, which is a body representing cement producers and ready-mix producers. We're saying we should come up with a construction master plan, which is going to really go with the government and say, how can we be able to assist? What sort of skills do we have in terms of implementation of projects? What are the things that we can be able to assist, unlock from the government? Define what the problems are, and also start looking forward in terms of the skills provision, for instance. We are losing skills. How do we ensure that the kids that goes into varsity and study civil engineering have got a future and it's still an attractive thing to study at the university? So these are all the things that we are trying to put together. And I must say, there is some level of commitment that the government is putting in. We're currently working with a whole lot of departments within the government. We worked very closely with the previous Minister of Infrastructure SA, and we're carrying on with that to try and put something that will be workable.
Of course, that also opens up a whole new can of worms in terms of just even at basic education level, never mind higher education, the avenues that are available for STEM careers, for those youngsters who will become tomorrow's engineers.
And that's why private sector has to play its role, because if let's give a hypothetical case where the government gets their act together and projects are being unleashed into the market. Is private sector gonna turn around and say, oh no, the problem is still the government. They have not trained enough artisans to be able to deliver these projects. I think then that will be very, very unfair to the government. So whilst we know that there are no projects in place, we should be investing as private sector into saying, how do we ensure that we've got the right skills, we've got the right technologies, and we can apply them. There is a lot of South Africans all over the world that are very good construction people, project managers that have fled the country to go somewhere else for greener pastures because there was nothing happening in the country.
And once gone, a lot of those skills cannot come back.
Exactly. And you don't get an engineer on day one of their graduation. There is mentorship programs that needs to be put in place. And there needs to be a place where they can practice those skills. And without that opportunity, you'll never be able to get it.
How challenging is the terrain you're navigating at the moment? I mean, your recent trading statement belies the smile you have on your face now.
Yeah, it is very challenging. But that's the pleasure of being a business person in South Africa. You always wake up to a lot of challenges. I think we just need to maintain a positive approach to it. I don't believe that it's something that we cannot do anything about. It's just to acknowledge it and say, how do we navigate around it? It is a very challenging environment. So if you look at it, we've had a situation where things have happened. For instance, the Ukraine war, nobody expected that. And we had different plans. And when that happens, then it takes us back. COVID was not expected. It came and we were able to navigate around it. We are sitting with a situation now that everything is in our hands. How do we then navigate around it? So whilst it is a challenging environment, I believe that we should be putting plans in place, and hence the construction master plan is very, very important in terms of defining all that.
We broke down construction as an industry into various sectors. Are there, if you were to gaze into your crystal ball, right, throw the bones, are there easy wins in the near future if we were to forecast the way ahead, the road ahead?
I think there is. And the easy wins is for private sector to say, how do we assist the government in unleashing the projects that they are there, right? So the Department of Public Works has got a lot of delivery to do, and they've got a lot of projects with budgets that are assigned. We always hear of local governments taking money back to Treasury. And the only reason why they do that is because they failed to execute in terms of their plans. And the question that we're continuously asking as we construct the construction master plan is to say, can we identify areas that will assist in terms of the delivery, in terms of the infrastructure? And that's the area that we're working on. You know, one of the things that I always mention when I talk to people about the infrastructure, unleashing the infrastructure, if you look at the Lanseria development that has been spoken about, I'm not sure of the numbers, but it's a very small portion that is required from the government in terms of the water extending from Randburg into Lanseria, and the roads, and obviously the sewage system. And once it's there, there's billions of money that is sitting with the private sector that will be actually deployed in that area. Even on a smaller scale, I grew up in a township and I spend a lot of my time going back to the township. If you look at the so-called RDP houses or low-cost housing, we put up those small structures without even fencing and a small toilet on the outside. You go away, you come back 5 years later. It's a completely different picture, because once people have got that basic small house, they then start improving into that. And that gets the construction market going. So the so-called bucket builder that we're talking about is what I believe does not get counted when we talk about 4% of GDP. It's a lot more. There is all these guys that are sitting in the township and their livelihood is putting cupboards, tiles, and all of that in those same houses. So it's a much bigger mover of the economy than we think.
And of course, every builder, you don't care, they all use bags of cement.
Yes, and that's what we would like to encourage. But what we would like to encourage, what has happened in the industry at the moment, is that because of the imbalance between supply and demand, you're starting to get a lot of pressure on the pricing. And when the pressure comes in on the pricing, then you start looking at the quality starting to deteriorate. So if you go into, especially in those areas where you don't have civil engineers have to pass structures, you've got inferior quality product that is being used there. In South Africa, we are blessed to have a lot of ash, which we can use legitimately so to extend a product, just like you blend oros with water to extend that product. But then what you find is overextended product coming from backyards and being sold in the market. But that in itself, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to be living with that problem.
We're also seeing, of course, a period of rapid urbanization, and that's going to be the story not only for South Africa, but indeed the region and the continent. Are we playing catch up in a sense to the realities on the ground? In other words, we've gone on this rollout of this, social project to provide housing, and now government is talking about providing people land from which they can build their own homes, have that sense of ownership from the get-go. Is the industry thinking creatively enough about how to participate in that change?
Yes, and I personally believe that providing land, and the example I gave you earlier, where when the low-cost housing is put in place, people actually go ahead and make those beautiful dwellings. So what people need is the infrastructure provided in terms of roads, water, sewage system, and give me a stand, I will build. And that's what government should be spending a lot of money on. The issue around catching up, I think we are not, unfortunately, because a couple of years ago, we were talking about something like $59 billion that is a backlog on the infrastructure provision in the country. And that is growing. It's not really shrinking. We are not making up. And the problem is you actually can see it all over South Africa in terms of all the squatter camps that are coming up, the deterioration in the roads. And it doesn't help that the rail infrastructure is also deteriorated, and it puts a lot of pressure on the road infrastructure. So I'm not sure of the numbers, but for South Africa, there is two parts. When we talk about construction and infrastructure provision, we've got a lot of old ailing infrastructure that needs to be upgraded to catch up before we even speak about new infrastructure. So that's why I'm saying the demand is there, and it's becoming a big, big challenge that we need to address.
When I ask about whether we are thinking imaginatively enough about the needs that we need to fulfill, there's this idea where traditionally we've built our cities in an urban sprawl, right? Everybody's got their piece of land, their little corner. What if we reimagined, and I'm not saying this would work, but maybe instead of a sprawl, we start building up high-rise buildings that are concentrated areas where people have access to amenities reasonably close to them, whether that be schools or clinics or hospitals, and of course, even places of work and commercial centers.
Yeah, and you've spoken about the traditions that exist. So we have actually started that in South Africa in terms of building up, and it is less accepted. But there are, out of desperation, there are areas where it has worked very well. Communal living, in terms of our concept, has not been very encouraged. But second to that, there are also, because one of the biggest challenges that the government will have is the speed of delivery. To catch up with all this backlog, it's not only delivering on the project, you will actually also have to be innovative in terms of the speed of delivery. So when you look at what we call the precast or preformed buildings, where you put up a house in less than 3 days, those are the concepts that we actually should be providing and looking at and enhancing. Even with schools, you do not want to have people putting brick by brick to build a school. You want to have this preform as a solution, because the issue is the speed of how quickly you can deliver that. And these are concepts that have been workshopped with the government from time to time. There are companies. In fact, there are more companies of South Africa that are implementing such projects outside in Rwanda, in the DRC, in Zimbabwe, which could have been actually implemented in South Africa.
And that tells me it's a mindset change that needs to happen, because of course we're seeing it now in the renewables space. We're powering projects, we're powering our homes in ways that were perhaps inconceivable 5 years ago.
Yeah. But it does not have to wait for a desperate situation for us to start being innovative. I think one of the encouraging thing that the government had actually spoken about was professionalizing local government. And this professionalizing of local government, it's not about forgetting about the social needs, but actually fulfilling those social needs. But unless it is professionalized and you've got people that understand town planning, understand project management, understand execution of projects, we will not be able to move forward. And that's what we are pushing for as an industry, to say, how do we professionalize the industry so that we can be able to deliver the projects?
What will success look like?
Look, success, I've been in the construction industry or working for cement for over 30 years. And when I drive past a school or drive past a church or drive past any hospital, I always look at it and say, that's my work. That's what I do. I wake up every morning to make cement, and it is used to build these everlasting structures. Success for me will be a situation where in South Africa, infrastructure is not a talk about the backlog, but talk about what can we do to better people's lives. That will be what success is.
Dare we fail?
If we don't deal with issues like corruption, construction mafias that we speak about, we don't professionalize the delivery of this infrastructure, yes, we will fail. But I think it will take a lot. We always talk about how resilient South Africans are. We are currently making a whole lot of plans around the power issues that we have, and they seem to be working. However, we need a government to come to the party and act professionally.
Political will, perhaps even leadership. From the jaws of defeat, how many times have South Africans snatched an unlikely victory? This is one more episode in our series of What's Trending.